Welcome to our Harmonyus podcast series. My name is Michael Francis Lott, and I am here with author Peter Wells, who is the author of the book Notes from the West Pole. And today we're going to be diving into his piece called The Game is Up.
Since man killing man became a way of life, and people killing people became big business, government has cornered the market. Only men and women authorized by government are allowed to be killers. Otherwise, killing is a crime punishable by death, executed by a government-authorized killer. Government is in absolute power, and each person is its subject. When the British Parliament beheaded Charles I in 1640, they took away the power of the king, the absolute power over the people inherited from William the Conqueror, and retained it for themselves. And when the American colonies declared their independence from Britain and constituted a new government, they too retained the inherited power of the conqueror to rule and regulate the people. The original idea behind the Declaration of Independence was to create a democracy of free and equal people, with the consent of the governed, unfettered by any form of tyranny. We're not there yet. We are still subject to the power of the conqueror in the form of a ruling government that recognizes no greater authority than itself. The whole human family, in fact, is subject to the policies and the vision of the United States government. The vision of the present administration is of a world at war. This is not the vision of the American people whose sons and daughters are sacrificed. This is the vision of American and international special interests, mega corporations, arms manufacturers, oil companies, motivated by greed for power and wealth. These special interests pay for the election campaigns of the president. It's no surprise, therefore, that these investors in the president can influence his policies. These same backers invest in both candidates for president and in both political parties, thereby guaranteeing their influence in the government no matter who wins election. Is this any way to run a country? Do we consent to this? We have not yet achieved a democracy of free people. The consent of the governed has not yet been realized. The United States and Britain have adopted a system of adversarial democracy sponsored by big business, incorporating conflict between citizens and war between nations into an organized way of life. Since law and politics rule the nation, and the law and the politics are adversarial, then we can expect the lawyers and the politicians to be skilled in adversarial relationship, and we can expect the culture to be in a constant state of war. In addition to the foreign wars in Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, the Balkans, the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've had the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on crime. Now we have the war on terrorism, which is to say war everywhere, all the time. Ironically, the more we war against drugs, poverty, crime, the more they flourish. The war on terrorism will sponsor more terrorism. Is this what we want? The destruction of the World Trade Center was a crime against humanity. People of all races, all religions and nationalities were murdered on September the 11th, 2001. This mad act of human self-destruction occurred in a world marketplace for the whole human family to witness. It symbolizes the desperate confusion of our condition. The bombing of people by people, no matter how smart or crude the device, whether sanctioned by Osama bin Laden or the US president, whether it's the World Trade Center or Oklahoma City or a Bali nightclub or Belgrade or Baghdad or poor Afghanistan, the bombing of people by people harms all of us. Who said we shouldn't kill each other? Was he a Christian? A believer in Islam? Was he Jewish? The manufacture and distribution of weapons of human self-destruction is out of control. Humanity has been growing and escalating its power to self-destruct for millennia. From the tribal skirmishes of our remote ancestors to the whole world at war, we have come to the moment where change is imperative. We call ourselves a democracy of free and equal citizens, but we are encumbered by a warrior belief system that insists on dividing humanity between friend and enemy and between good and evil, which dominates its own citizenry and now threatens the world. We've allowed our governments absolute power over us, and it isn't working. An adversarial relationship between government and the person is detrimental to the whole society. Government without the consent of the governed is tyranny. If we want to realize a vision of a human family in a harmonious world, it won't be possible in an adversarial democracy. It's our duty to move forward. The game is up.
So one of the things that I really appreciate about this piece is the historical context that it offers with William the Conqueror. And it really shows us and gives us insight as to where our social system comes from. Because for me, like, I'm just born into this system. It's all I know. I haven't really had a chance to look at it from that historical context. And when we see it in that way, it really reveals to us that it is an echo from the past that is no longer relevant for where we are in our stage in evolution. So I really appreciate that reflection. So to you, what is the game in your own words?
The game is the domination of the person. And how do we move within that context is the question. We have systems, all of which, all around the world, insist on domination of every person in that nation. And just about most religions have a similar attitude, but we're under this impression that we're insignificant and that the ruling voice is what we have to pay attention to. And the ruling voice, if it wants war, then we have to faithfully walk into it and risk our lives, because the power is over us and above us. The power is not seen to be within us. So this civilization that is dependent on human conflict, really, for its growth, is now reaching a point where it's really intolerable. Recently we've had these bombings in which the person is not known and is blindly destroyed. A family is in grief for the rest of their lives because of an absolutely ignorant act that achieves nothing but perhaps the vengeance. But vengeance doesn't satisfy. Vengeance is a waste, a total waste of oneself as well as whoever one is directing the vengeance against. So we're in a very tricky situation. We've been organized into this for centuries, and we believe in our nations. We cherish our past and the warrior victories, the military victories that we've experienced. But now the game is up. That game is over with. It's going to take a while before it really surfaces, but the idea that we put our lives together in order to fight the enemy, in order to defeat somebody because our ruler says we should. Look at Hitler, look at Mussolini, even Stalin, even many rulers around the world are tyrants over their people. So what we have now is we have the nation state in power, wrested from the conqueror. The British Parliament had it and took it and ran with it until the United States resisted, and now the United States has it. And just about every other country, I think every country has it. The idea that the person is not a value in itself, it's the nation state, the ruler, the king, whoever is in power. That's the important aspect. So we're going beyond that. We're going now to the point where the person is sovereign rather than the nation state. And that's the only way we can go, because the amount of tyrannical self-destruction that's going on has to end. It is self-destruction. We're one human family, and we're tending to destroy ourselves. And this idea that we're divided between opposite entities just wreaks havoc on us. So we have to have a new idea of what we're doing here. The old game of dividing humanity and being conquered is no longer cool at all. We're now operating from within ourselves, and we're less likely to conform to a miserable edict, although that's still happening.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant paradigm shift to move from a ruler or an authority outside oneself to an authority within oneself. And, practically speaking, does that look like anarchy? If we just are fully built a system or ruled surrounding this intelligence that is within us?
Well, anarchy, it's almost like a dirty word, but in fact, it means personal freedom, and it means each according to his abilities. But let's look at the whole situation. What we now have is we have an anarchy of nations. No nation in the world believes that there's a greater power than its own. Just like a person, if you call it anarchy, is saying that of themselves, that there is no greater power than this power that is my life. And that's more accurate and more true than the idea that the power of the nation should absolutely compel the person. Even worse than that, we have the nation as a military threat to every person. The police are given power over the person. So somehow, and it's not working. It's just simply not working. The game is up. The way that we've been living for the last few hundred years is no longer appropriate, and we have to begin again, and we begin within ourselves. We begin with our own balance and our own harmony in this life. We have to find our own way, and that will lead, I believe, to a better social order. But at the moment, we're in disastrous shape, because the self-destructive elements are just everywhere. And we're witnessing it all the time. So the awakening to a new game is imminent.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, it's almost like each and every single one of us, we have to take personal responsibility to kind of be pioneers of our own life, pioneers of this new paradigm. And it requires each of us to really face the unknown, to see what lies beyond these social systems. So with that being said, even though we all must take personal responsibility to go into that new space within ourselves, I can do that in my own life, but even in the midst of doing that, I still live within a culture that operates within that old paradigm. So as I make that transition on my own, how would you say that, what is my duty to relate to the rest of the culture operating in the way that it is? I obviously still have to participate on some level.
Yeah, well, it brought us here. It's brought us here, and we have a marvelous culture, really. We have all kinds of inventions that help the individual person to live. But what we don't have is we don't have an order that really works for the person. We're still working for the ruler, whatever that might be. And the ruler can do anything he or she wants in our culture. I mean, yes, there's checks and balances, and we can see right now with Trump, who's in the hot seat every day, somebody's accusing him of not being fair or being divisive or being argumentative. So, I mean, let's face the bottom line. The bottom line is that the system and the way of life that has brought us here is now dysfunctional. We can now see it. It was always dysfunctional, but we hadn't seen it. Now we can clearly see that it's not working. It's not of benefit. So the change begins within the person. But we can have some ideas, I think. One idea that would really benefit us enormously, if it could be achieved, would be to look at our belief system, our rule of law, which is punitive and set against the person. Can we make that a more compassionate rule of law, where the purpose is to heal the problem, to resolve the problem? It might take a while to do that, but punishment and the opposition of the governmental structure against the person is stupid. It doesn't work. And the perpetuation of it just creates more suffering and misery without getting anywhere. So I think that the police state consciousness is on the way out, that we have to prepare for that. And I think we have to take responsibility in an absolute whole way. We don't take responsibility of being against this party or this cause. We take the responsibility of dealing with the whole thing and working on it as a compassionate realization of what we're doing here.
I love that. I love what you're saying about cultivating compassion more within our social systems, because I think one of the biggest collective viruses that we have is this lack of empathy for one another. And the reason why we can divide ourselves is because I think that we dehumanize one another. You know, in order to put someone in jail or to sentence them to death and to just treat them like an animal, you have to see them as something other than yourself. And so I think a big shift in that paradigm is opening the gates of compassion within ourselves to really recognize ourselves and one another and to build social systems around that fundamental understanding.
Right.
So it's a healing that is taking place.
Of course, at the moment, we have millions of government employees that are empowered to act, with absolute authority over the person. And their compassion isn't in their guidebook or in the law. So I believe the change that we're going to go through, that we're all going through, it's happening to us right now, is we're becoming accepting of our whole condition, rather than one side against the other, rather than being in this dualistic nonsense, which we've been for centuries. Now we have to address the whole thing, the whole planet, the whole environment, the whole person, and every whole person. It's not, we've got hatred being passed from generation to generation without resolution. There can be compassion. There can be a healing. Healing. The word heal comes from whole. To make things whole is to heal. And that's what we need to do now.
Yeah. And one of my own personal philosophies that I kind of believe in myself is that the relationship that we have with other people, the relationship that we have with the world around us, the point of origin for all of those relationships outside of us is what we cultivate within ourselves. It's our relationship with ourselves. And I think the more compassionate, the more loving, and the more understanding we can be with how we relate to ourselves and our own process and self-judgment, the more we are able to overflow and bring that forth into our relationships out in life. So I think the first thing that we need to do is really take responsibility for developing that quality of compassion within ourselves, for ourselves, first and foremost.
Yes. Okay. It's just very, very difficult to live in this civilization where the noise and the stench of human conflict is everywhere. We see it on the media. We know it's happening, bombings in New Zealand or Sri Lanka. There is an insanity going on. So, yes, we have to deal with ourselves. But what we really have to deal with is strengthening each other to deal with the machinery that's basically self-destructive. That we're in a situation where there are so many weapons of mass destruction, there's so many guns, so many bombs, that we have to act urgently, I think, towards this compassionate way. It has to be. It's necessary. It's not optional. Mm-hmm. Because if we continue, we will destroy ourselves.
Yeah. And how do you believe that we cultivate that compassion?
Well, I think it's within us. We already have it. I think that when we're not resisting or reacting to some kind of abuse or punishment or problem that has been imposed on us, that I think our nature is compassionate. I think we want to save life. You find firemen and doctors and all kinds of people saving lives and being heroic in the doing of that. So it's our nature to be compassionate, to be caring. So we need the rule of law to be changed in that respect. We need the purpose of the rule of law to be compassionate and of benefit to the people, not a hostile, antagonistic presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Peter.
Oh, thank you,
Really
Michael.
appreciate this discussion. So, All right. Until next time, see you next week. Stay connected with us and get the book Notes from the West Pole on our website, www.harmonius.com, and that's spelled Harmony Us with a Y. Thanks for listening.